Hey everyone. Hey, nice. Welcome to the May meetup of PHP Amersfoort. And this month you'll have to do with just me. I hope you don't mind. I hope you don't mind. That's a song. The rest, Renato is on holiday and Richard just became a dad, so yay for that. Yeah, applause. Okay, so yeah, awesome that you're here. There is Wi-Fi, Enterprise guests. The password is Eersteling, which is also on the top of this building, Eersteling. And, oh dear, almost failed there. I would like to start by thanking the location sponsor, Enrise, which you can probably tell from this sign and all the other signs around the building. And also Server Grove, Ingewikkeld, and O'Reilly for sponsoring us. And of course JetBrains for their awesome software and their free license for the raffle. The O'Reilly sponsorship consists of a book which we can offer to you to review. If you write one paragraph on the book as a review, you can keep it for free, which is really cool. So if you're interested, just approach me or the other people who aren't here. And I'll make sure you get your book and then yeah, free books. So, the the talk today will be Observatio. Whew, okay, that was hard. By Pim. Yeah, sorry, they requested especially, you know, so I didn't. And in case you're a fan of QR codes. Yeah. So far, my talk. I'd like to give the word to Pim Elshoff.
That was probably the best introduction any speaker has ever had. Thank you so much, Rick. And thank you all for coming. I'm going to start by taking us back in time. I'm going to start by going ancient. These are two sculptures. One of them is Greek, one of them is Roman. Has anyone got an idea which one is which?
Left one is Roman.
Yeah. So, how can you see that? Where can you? Yeah. Usually, yeah. It's kind of a little bit a giveaway. So, when the Romans and the Greeks, when they first encountered each other, the Romans were still having their little dream empire just in Italy. When the Greek, they've had their world empire and they were already far in decline. And even though they were in decline, their ideas, their culture had spread far beyond their borders. And some historians believe that when the Romans met the Greeks, they kind of felt like they had a bit of an imposter syndrome going, like they were maybe have a little bit of an inferiority complex. But some other historians believe that the Romans, they didn't have that so much. They more looked at the Greeks as someone they could learn from. You know, the Greeks, they had a lot of good ideas, they had some good things going for them, and so the Romans, they just kind of took from that what they thought was good. And that was very deliberate. It was not something that the Romans just happened to do. It wasn't an accident. They had a process for that. And they termed that observatio, imitatio, emulatio, to observe, to imitate, and to improve upon. Now, and that's what I would like to do today. I would like to give you a chance to learn from some of our mistakes. Does anyone else have a fail wall? This is my team's fail wall. So we've made some mistakes. You can see my name on there a couple of times. Maybe more than the rest of my team. I don't know why that is. So we've made plenty of mistakes, and we celebrate them. We make sure that when we've made a mistake, we learn from it first, and then we celebrate. So. Why should you believe anything I have to say this evening? Oh, we started a long time ago. We started well over 14 years ago. By then it was still PHP 4. And soon-ish, we are going to be moving to PHP 7. We're still running 5.6. My laptop is on 7. We're still waiting for Memcached. Memcached is not ready for... We're not ready for Memcached. Memcached is not ready for us. But once Memcached is done, we are pretty much ready to go to 7. we have one code base. One code base of a lot of code, 2.5 million lines of PHP code, 6.5 million lines of code in total. And we're hosting 1,500 customers and more than 20,000 websites on that one code base. It's not entirely true, there's 3 versions, but they lag behind. We have well over 800,000 users. Not all of them log in every month, about 300,000 unique users per month, but all those users combined generate about 4 million requests per hour, and those are served from 2 racks at True. And that's what for our technical skills. We also have some more softy skills with 5 Scrum teams that we started Scrum about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. So you could say that we have more than plenty of room for mistakes. So what we'll be talking about? We'll be talking about doing the right thing, because it does make a lot of sense to do things right if you don't know to do the right thing. So that's the first 2 things that we're going to be looking at. And then finally, we'll be looking at doing things a little bit better every time, because contrary to what we saw at the start, this is not sculpting, this is not set in stone. This is very fluid, so keep it that way. If you have any questions, by the way, just shout them at me. Sorry. So let's start with doing the right thing. Who here is involved in gathering requirements? Wow, that's way less than I expected. So who isn't, of the ones that didn't raise their hands, who isn't but would like to be? Yo, that's 1, that's 2-ish. Come on, I know you're there. So why aren't you involved in requirements?
I'm still studying, so
Ah,
I'm only studying. Not
that's
yet
a good reason.
So I'll probably look at something where I can combine the rules and do some of this and some of that.
I'm a dever, but I am heavily involved in the requirements process. My team does not accept anything on the backlog unless we have put it there, together with the customer, of course. We don't come up with them, but we do curate them. And I think that's very important to be involved in this process, because you are responsible for the correct outcome of the sprint. So it's up to you to make sure that you are doing the right thing first and foremost. So let's start with a little bit of a story from when we were just starting out with Scrum. This is a couple of years ago, and I have to make sure I'm not going to trip on that. When we started doing Scrum, one of our biggest customers wanted a migration. Part of their system was not migrated to us just yet, and they wanted that too. And so we had to do some estimation, and it took us 2 days to estimate the 250 stories that they came up with no prioritization, much at all. And we weren't good enough to ask all the questions yet, to ask all the important questions. And so they asked for one feature. Mod waterschappen. Mod being short for module, and waterschappen being Dutch for waterschappen. And this module, it was supposed to allow people to see for relations in which waterschap do they live, or perhaps even maybe export a list of relations from a given waterschap. And we made it. It was very fun to make. It was a lot of work, but it was really cool. And it turned out no one used this. It took 10% of budget. No one uses it. And so we asked, why was this so important to make? It had to be done. And they told us, well, yeah, I thought this one guy asked for it this one time, and we could have done so much with that time. And instead, we did a really fun but useless thing. So if only we knew how to ask the right questions. So let's look at a case study. This is a redacted requirement, a requirement that we have gotten quite recently, actually. Procurios is big into fundraising these days. We are trying to move into that field, and so we get customers who want things like this. They want to export the gifts that that they've received, or donations. What can we improve? What can we improve from this requirement? A why would be good.
What exactly? Yeah.
Well, you could go into details of what exactly it means to export a gift, but that's too soon. When what? These are all good questions, but I heard something about user here. Which user? That's a good question, and it's also my next slide, so I'm going to go with that one. So is anyone here familiar with the user story format? Yeah. So the user story format kind of says, as a certain persona, like Mark the marketing manager, whom I Googled, and apparently this is Mark. As Mark the marketing manager, we want something. So, as Mark the marketing manager, I want to export gifts, and apparently I also have a reason now, because Mark wants to send a mailing. So this is the format of a user story. As a persona, I want something so that I can achieve some goal. Does that make sense? Yeah? What do you think about this one? It's a little bit better because we now have a persona that we can ascribe some features to. We can connect with Mark. We can start by eliciting some empathy in ourselves. But we're not done yet. Huh?
Like a gift doesn't have an address, but the mailing needs to be sent to an address, so that's
Yeah.
almost like a contradiction.
Yeah, there's something missing. But you can imagine that gifts, they have kind of a gift giver. So, yeah.
Well, it's still technical.
It's still very technical.
It's a technical solution.
Why does Mark want to export gifts? No one wants to export things.
No.
Why would Mark want to export things? It's probably something that that Mark used to do. Mark used to have the Excel sheet from someone else, and
To me, this indicates that someone here doesn't know his requirements yet.
exactly. So let's dive a little bit deeper. And we already kind of have that in here because Mark thinks that this is a good way to achieve that, but he wants to achieve that. So let's go one step deeper. As Mark, the marketing manager, I want to send a mail to customers with a big account. We're getting somewhere. So that Mark can tell them how their gifts were used to improve the world. So now we have a why in there. Yeah. What do we think? What are we thinking? Define big account. Well, that's something that you can easily define because it's a question of $20,000 an hour. That's not the big question, but it's good. But that's good for during the sprint when you're making this. So it's a proper user story, but it's still, as Jarek said before, a means to an end. Mark wants to mail. No one wants to send a mail. He wants to achieve, apparently, that people feel really good about their gifts. And sending a mail is just a means to that end. So let's dive a little bit deeper. As Mark, the marketing manager, I want to tell customers with a big account how we use their gifts to improve the world so they know they made a difference. Yeah. What are we thinking? Anything else left to improve, maybe? Or is this...
How often?
How often? That's the difference between a saying of, let's say, changing a scheduled job from once a week to once a month or something. So that's a good question, but it's not a big question. It's not a question that is going to change your project. And there is still something in here that's going to change the project. Yeah. Yeah. That's always a good question. But you can assume that when you're questioning your product owner, this is slippery ice. You can assume that when you question your product owner, he or she will be able to tell you what the value is for the business. They selected people to focus on. So apparently they thought that there is something here that is going to make them a lot of money because there's people who are getting detached from the organization or something. Maybe they saw the number of gifts decline or something like that.
It's undefined.
It is still undefined.
So it's not so they know they made a difference, but to keep the customers with the company.
We'll get to that one. So I would say, is anyone here familiar with the term object envy? I would say that this is persona envy. So object envy means you have a bunch of code and it's in a class, but it kind of has too much responsibility and there's a little piece of it that wants to get out, that wants to be its own object. And right here we have Mark who wants to, oh, that's not working. There's the laser pointer in there. So we have Mark here, and Mark wants to do something. So Mark has to be tasked with doing something. We're going to make software that's going to burden Mark, but the benefit is for someone else. And that's difficult, that's dangerous. So let's dive deeper and let's see who the benefit really is for. Let's meet Claire. Claire is our big spender customer. I Googled that one too. Yeah, Claire treated herself after donating. She felt really good about herself and she thought she deserved a treat. Well, let's not go into that. Let's look at what Claire wants. So apparently Claire, the big spender customer, she wants to know how her gift helped the world, so she knows she made a difference. Now we're talking no software anymore. We're talking about one person who has to be involved with the system and get a benefit. So this is not technical, but purely functional. We're just talking about people and the way that the people interact. So we write software for these kind of things. And the software that we write implements a solution that someone thought of. And the solution solves a certain problem. And that's what we did just now. We went from a piece of software requirement that we got, and we just took it a step back towards the actual problem. Apparently there is a problem revolving around Claire, and someone, probably Mark, already thought of a way that he could solve the problem, and he gave us his software. And we said, no, take it a step back. And he gave us his solution, and we took it another step back. And now we have met the problem. When you go back to the problem, you open up the possibility of looking at multiple solutions. And every solution could have multiple ways of implementing it. And I bet most of you, when you're coding and when you're talking to people who know about the requirements, you're already doing this. But you're doing it implicitly. I bet some of you at some of the time say, why am I making this? Why don't we solve it like that? But this is the way that you do that explicitly. You go back to the problem. And then you open up a door to do this. One of the solutions is to make the export that Mark requested. That is a perfectly fine piece of software to make. And it might take you a couple of story points or hours or however you measure time to make. And then it would take Mark some time to operate, and everyone's happy. But there's also another solution. We could spend more time up front and make a solution that would be really awesome, but that would be more expensive. But on the long run, in fact, I would say that this is the difference, then this would probably pay back for itself quite soon. Does that make sense? Yeah? No questions? So we looked into this because of this graph that we used in an internal presentation a couple of years ago. We noticed that our customer satisfaction was declining. And this was before we did Scrum. And what we noticed is people would get in the door with us and they would be so enthusiastic and we're going to create all this cool software, and then they'd drop this big pile of documents on our desk and they would say bye, and half a year later they would come back. And it wouldn't be exactly what they wanted, but it was what they asked for. And they'd start using it and it wouldn't really match because they do software projects once or twice their lives. We do 40 a year. So we thought we have to do this differently, and we went with the Scrum solution, but we struggled with getting to that problem. And so we still ended up making a lot of software that was what the customers said they needed, said they asked for, said they wanted, and not the problems that they needed solving. So the orange line is the goal of 2 years ago, and I would wager that we're pretty far along the way. We're not there yet, but, well, your team, no, but my team. So this is a means to do an early reality check, to make sure people go back to understanding their actual problems, stop talking about software, and it opens up the door to really solve their problems.
How did you make this graph? Is this by your feeling, or is it just measured with
No, this is absolutely just a feeling. Yeah, we didn't measure this. We did customer interviews, but we didn't grade them. So I definitely can't say that this is science.
Okay, I understand.
But not, and it doesn't have to be, right? A lot of what we do is not science, but hermeneutics or heuristics.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're writing stories, make sure you keep asking why. A good rule of thumb is to ask why at least 5 times. Why? You know, we teach our children how to because it's annoying, but it's really useful. And make sure you understand who it really is for. Especially be careful about disconnects between people who have to do something and people who benefit. And a lot of this is about problems and opportunities. That really is the only thing about requirements. You either make something that's not working for them work better, or you make something that's not working yet, that's not there yet, and you deliver that. But people talk about must and want, and also make sure that your user stories, they're not about tech. They're not about sending mails, and they're not about money. If you have a user story that says, as a businessman, I want to make a lot of money, so, that's not useful. That's not going to help you create better solutions. And that's the goal of every user story in the end. Every user story should benefit in some way that could quite likely be jotted down to money. So what do? You make sure that the stories are in the language of your customer. It's about their domain, so not about software. It's their language, their domain, in terms of their domain. Now, writing personas, as we started out with the first step, writing personas is really, really difficult. It gets really easy to make personas that are not based on data. So if you have data at all, and many of our customers don't, because we have a lot of customers that do like 2 or 3 sprints, and that's all they have time and money for. So yeah, do with what you can, but if you have analytics, or if you have customer interviews, or any other way in which you can get some actual data to base your personas on, then that's really brilliant. And most of your product owners, especially if they're smaller organizations, they're probably quite well in touch with the people that they're working for. So they might know quite well, but it's not data. And if you have data, that's always better. And finally, estimates. Estimates are also very, very hard, especially when you go back. Especially when you go back to the problem. It gets increasingly more difficult to estimate because you're getting increasingly more vague. And some people, it's difficult for them. So in that case, I would recommend to take to just estimate a couple of those possible solutions in your mind and take the median one, not the average, because some stories could be solved in very exceeding ways. But take the median and just go with that. It's an estimate, it's a forecast, it's, I hope, not a promise. So that's beforehand. During, make sure you keep talking. Stories and requirements, they are the opening to a conversation. They are not set in stone. So make sure you keep talking. And during your sprint planning meeting, that's the time to pick the actual solution that you're going to implement. The sprint planning meeting, that's when you talk to the PO and say, okay, well, we want to have these stories this week. How can we fit solutions for these stories into this week? That's when the hard choices are made. And your product owner should do them, not you, because it's their problem and not yours. But remember, after the sprint planning, it's not set in stone. Again, be agile, be flexible. Make sure that you keep talking, because that's the way that the best, yeah?
How do you deal with conversations that keep going? Within sprint?
That's a good question. So we often find that happens during the stand-up. We time box everything. Everything, really. So time box your stand-up, and if you find that the conversation keeps going, move it to the 16th minute, as they say, to after the stand-up. And we allot some time for that. Usually it's just a feeling, but we time box it. So say we say to the customer, they want this solution that way and we can't deliver on that. So we'll have a conversation, we'll time box an hour, maybe half an hour, depending on how difficult we feel it's going to be, and how valuable we think it's going to be. If we think there is something to gain, we'll do it. If not, to sales. But if we can't...
I think I should have been...
Oh, sorry.
No problem, a bit more clear. I meant conversation figuratively.
Mm-hmm.
If requirements keep shifting,
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep the conversation going, of course, but when do you decide it's enough for this sprint? How do you decide that?
I don't. The product owner decides. It's their time. And if they feel that talking more about things is achieving value for them, it's not my problem. But it's often quite difficult for them to realize that. So it does require you to be very upfront and very honest about what you're doing with your time. I've been tricked once.
Only once?
Only once.
Wow.
Today.
It was today, and it had something to do with an airco. No. So I've only encountered one time that we had the clock running, and we have those timer clocks that you just set for 1 hour, and it's a big red circle, and it just counts back. And every 10 or 15 minutes, I say, okay, we have so much time left. Okay, we have so much time left. Yeah, and the customer's like, yeah, we'll make it. It'll fit. It's fine. And then the time was out, and he went, but no, I warned you. And if that happens, it's to sales, because it's not what I can do. I'm a dever, and but I'm not a talker. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? You thought of something.
Yeah, I thought about how would my client, if I had my client for me, and I would say, okay, we're done, and go talk to the sales manager.
No, but you don't say it like that.
I try to imagine how would you say something and not make your client super angry.
Yeah. The important thing is to make a big show of this. So throw with things and make sure. No.
Exactly. Yeah. Laptop.
So if you are scared to say that or something, that's perfectly fine. Acknowledge that, and maybe talk to sales first, and then to your customer, because you're stuck and you need help, and that's good to acknowledge that, because that's the only professional thing to do, really. Now, and if you feel like you need sales there to have that conversation, I'm in the fortunate position that our sales manager is also the big boss. So if I need his help, he'll take care of it, and he always has, and he always will. So he's got my back covered. So maybe I'm talking from a fortunate position. But yeah, get help and make sure you don't overstep what you feel is a good conversation. Any other questions? All right. So let's move on. There's one more bullet point left here. One thing that we are also usually very lucky with. Our product owners are usually there at least once every day, even if it's only for a couple of hours. Some product owners are there almost full time. That's such a great luxury. But ever since customers came to our office to work, that was a huge shift in our quality of solutions. So if you can get that for yourself, that's absolutely brilliant. It's maybe one of the most important things out of everything out of this presentation. Yes? All right. So we looked at doing the right thing. So let's look at doing things right. And I'll leave you with this one for 20 seconds. So it doesn't really, the thing to look at is this part here. This is PHP Storm. PHP Storm has the insanely cool feature that I never use except for this presentation to collapse functions so that you can see in one view how long a function is. And this particular function is 2,500 something lines of code. This is not craftsmanship.
And it returns like a boolean or a string. Wow. In all those lines, it can't make up its mind.
Well, that's because
That's all I can get.
that's because sometimes it just returns sometimes it returns the HTML of the report, and sometimes it starts a scheduled job that generates a PDF. So I was gonna I was gonna lead this one with, you know, it may still be very simple inside.
It passes file info, which is not the object file info, as a reference, and which is an array.
Let's just say it's not craftsmanship. So this is
You guys love side effects, don't you?
Would you happen to know the end path complexity?
I didn't.
It's over 9,000.
It's over 9,000. I bet it's over 9,000. I don't want to know. No, this is old, fortunately. We don't do this anymore. And that took us some time. So what's wrong with this code? Yeah. So one thing that's really wrong with this code, bar all the specific technical things that you can say about it, is that this code was written for an audience that I would say it should not have been written for. This code is written for a machine. And the machine runs this code fine. It's attested by the still 2 customers that are still running on this code. But this code is not written for other people. This code is not written to be read. And I think that's not a good thing. I think that people who write code to get it to work and then feel like they're done, that's fine, but then you're an amateur. You're someone who does that for a hobby. If you're a professional, you write code for other people. We have a rule that we like to follow, which is called the Boy Scout rule. It's one coined, I think, by the Boy Scouts in the US and transferred to software development by Robert C. Martin. Always leave the campground cleaner than you found it. And the problem with code like we saw before is it's just impossible. You can't touch that. If you touch it, you break it, and then it's yours.
If you unit test to validate that it still functions.
Yeah.
Factor it easily, right?
The unit test to set up for that previous piece of code was twice as long as the code. No, we don't have unit tests for that code. So yeah, don't let it come that far. You have to make sure you intervene before that time. Once it comes that far, it's impossible to work with that unless you spend a significant amount of time on it, which is only worth it if you are going to do something with it, which we're not. So we're not. This is a Hickson Draconis area of our code base. No one gets there. No one wants to. So let's look at just a little trick. There's a little bug in here, and this is actually a manageable piece of code. What's the bug? That's true.
Well, and if the value is 0, empty will trigger on that, so it will return null.
So that's actually 2 other bugs. I just meant the typo.
Also, you return null.
Yeah, of course, this is probably not the best way to do things anyway.
Good example, though.
The point that I would like to make with this little example is one thing that we do particularly well when it's not unit tests or something, is at least that we employ a lot of means by which bad code hurts our eyes. We like to do a lot of ways in which bad code is obviously wrong. So not the old example, that's obviously wrong, but newer examples. Who here uses PHP Storm? I don't want to, oh, that's so good. I don't want to plug PHP Storm, but it's awesome. PHP Storm gives you a lot of information and warnings, and I always, well, I think I'm over it. But I used to tell PHP Storm, trust me, it's right, and it never was. So PHP Storm gives you a lot of warnings, and it's really easy to make sure all the warnings in your files are gone. So there's on the right side, on the outliner, there's red and yellow, and make sure all the red and yellow goes. And don't disable the warnings. So these are ways by which you can make it easy for yourself and for your team to do the right thing and make it hard to do the wrong thing. And these are just little tricks, it's just an example, but that's the modus in which we're looking at code these days. We come from a deep, dark past, and we are moving forward. Software craftsmanship is a particularly easy field to do a lot of imitatio and emulatio in. There's a lot of really good resources out there and a lot of really good techniques that you can and should know about. There's a solid, a calisthenics, T to D, B to D, all kinds of things. And there's a lot of meetups where people do presentations that actually go about those subjects. I'm just going to mention them here and not go into details. But what can be difficult about those is transitioning. I'm assuming most of you are working with more than one or two other people, developers. Yeah. So sometimes it can be difficult when you see things go wrong and you know ways in which you can fix that. You have to talk about that with other programmers who might not be interested in that at this moment because they have a project that's not going so well that they need to fix first. We call that vierkante wielen, square wheels. You have to, yeah, I want to put these round wheels on, but first I have to get to my destination. So that requires a lot of patience and humility. It's important to know what you don't know, and it's important to know that someone who might not know what you think they should know might not be that interested at this time. And one good approach is to show them and don't tell them. Go work together and just do it your way and see how they react. I've been at times very ecstatic to see other people take over my ideas, and I've been very, very disappointed to see other people not take over my ideas. And that's also fine, but with some patience, you'll get there. Questions? So let's look at the last one, doing things better. In order to do things better, it's important to do something first. You can't improve on randomness. I started coaching PHP programmers a couple of years ago through PHP mentoring, which I recommend, by the way. It's really fun to do. But in order to teach some of the people who were not so much beginners, they just learned a lot of wrong ways to go about programming. So I looked at myself. What do I do? How do I code? Not how do I think about requirements or solid or stuff like that, but just I sit down at the computer, what do I do? And I wrote my steps down. And it turns out I do 7 steps to make something work. And I use the Pomodoro technique to structure that. That's just working in 25 minutes and then stopping and then starting again. Is anyone here familiar with the Pomodoro technique? Oh, cool. That's fortunate. So now you already know. So it's just Italian for tomato because the guy who came up with had a timer in the shape of a tomato. Obviously. So what I do in 25 minutes, I make sure I have a to-do list I can work with. And that to-do list is prioritized. So I start with the top thing. Then I write my commit message before I write any code. Then I go make it work. I commit just making it work. Then I refactor and make sure the naming is properly and I didn't do empties. And then I commit that. And then I get the relief and ecstaticness of crossing the item off my to-do list. And then I go back to the start. Now, you might not think this is a good way to do things. You probably have your own way to do things, but this is my way, and it's a way that works. And I can improve upon this way, because I am very explicit about how I work. And so I can say, 25 minutes is not working for me, I could make it 30. Or I can make it 20, or I could do something else. But I have a starting point that I can emulatio from. So if you feel like Imitatio, or if you have a junior dever maybe who is looking for an approach to coding, you could do something like this. Now, 25 minutes, that might seem like it's insanely short. And it is at the first. When I started doing this, it took me 50 minutes to do something. And gradually, I started writing my to-do list in steps that went down and down and down. And now I'm between 23 and 29 minutes. And yes, that is measured. Oh yeah. Important also, if you're working on something and you find during your work for the task that you selected that you have an interesting idea, but it might not be too relevant for the task right now, you encounter something that you need to refactor or something, don't think about it, put it at the bottom of your list and move on. I also might find something that is worth thinking about. So at that point, stop your Pomodoro, stop the clock, git stash, and refocus your to-do list, and then restart from the top. I've been on Twitter sometimes in the past months, and it would appear feature branches are maybe not even a controversial subject anymore. Maybe they're just plain bad, but we do them. Ta ta ta. Has anyone here experienced feature branches? So we use feature branches because we had difficulties releasing the work of a sprint. We sometimes found that when we did all the work of a sprint in one branch, that it was difficult to release when one story didn't get accepted. Hmm?
Put it in. No one will see it.
Yeah, something like that.
You might be able to use it after a few years.
You know, it might just not be something they want, so let's not do that. So that's why we're using feature branches now. We create one feature branch for every user story that we're working on. And we don't refactor in feature branches. We refactor on main, and we create features in feature branches. We have a staging branch that we use to show changes on that a copy of the website could run on. When the customer has deemed a story good enough, we merge it to acceptance. And when the sprint is done, we merge acceptance to main. And one thing that was very important for us that we did wrong very often, and now we never do that anymore, is that branches don't survive the sprint. If branches survive the sprint, you're going to have merge problems. And if branches don't survive the sprint, you're already going to have merge problems.
But what if you have a story that doesn't get accepted by the customer, it is in acceptance, and you have another story that does get accepted by the customer, and it's also in acceptance? How do you merge acceptance to master?
Stories that don't get accepted by the customer shouldn't go to acceptance.
All right.
If it happens, fortunately, you can just remove acceptance, recreate it, and re-merge all the stories that you had before. Now, one way that you could do with this differently, which I expect most people to do, would be feature flags rather than feature branches. We use feature flags for all our modules that are shared by all the customers, and we use feature branches for the work that is only done for specific customers. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about branches. One thing that's really cool about using feature branches rather than feature flags is that feature branches allow you to merge the branch as a result of a code review. We use GitLab to never merge our own branches. And there's plenty of other tools for that. You could use something like Gerrit. Or I'm pretty sure there's plenty of other tools. I think JetBrains released one a while ago.
They did. Don't remember the name, but they did.
Upsource.
Yeah.
Upsource.
Yeah.
All right.
So we like code reviews. So ever since we started doing code reviews, we caught not just a lot of errors, but also just some not so good ideas and unclearly communicated code. So we try to model our development process to minimize the impact of mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen anyway, so we use code reviews to make sure that we fix mistakes that someone else made. We use good practices to prevent making mistakes in the first place. We use quick and easy deployments to make sure you can recover from mistakes. We have unit tests, but not a whole lot compared to the size of our code base. So unit tests are not working for us as well as they might for you. Most of our newer code is pretty well tested, but we have a lot of old code. It's not. One thing about code reviews that might be really challenging is they can be difficult to receive. A while ago, I created a union query. And it was a union of 5 really, really big, really, really difficult queries. A typical result of 20 records would take 5 to 10 seconds to. Apparently a coworker thought that was a bad idea. I have no idea why. So he did a code review and he said, you know, this shouldn't go into production. It's not a good idea. And I told him, well, so you come up with a different solution then. Now this was half a year before PHP Benelux 2014, I think. And when we went to that conference, we saw Ross talk about CQRS, which we hadn't heard of before. And it's a really cool idea. And it would have solved my problem. Except I was too stuck up and salty to think, you know, maybe my coworker's right and I should Google for a different solution. So if a coworker tells you there might be a different solution, maybe you can Google together or something, but don't tell them to F off. Code reviews help you. Code reviews are not about you, they're about your code. So learn.
Question.
Oh, yeah.
You commit everything, your Pomodoro thing, you commit like 2 times for every 25 minutes.
Yeah.
When
At
you-
least 2 times, quite often 4 or 5 times.
I don't know how long you spent on a ticket, but how does one do a code review when you have like 25 minutes for one ticket?
Yeah, that can be difficult. Code reviews tend to, when as code exceeds 50 lines of code, they go from, oh, you did something here to, yeah, that looks good. So take time. Someone is going to have to look at your code eventually. We want all the code to be looked at by at least 2 people.
At least 2 people will look through everything.
Including yourself.
Often.
So 3 persons in total, including yourself.
No, 2 including myself. You did give me a beautiful opportunity for a slam dunk on my next slide. So even better than code reviews is to do pair programming. Who has experience in pair programming? Oh, that's good. That's so good. Pair programming is really cool. Pair programming doesn't exactly yield twice the software that a single person would yield, but it does yield far exceeding better, cooler, super quality. So there are great benefits to doing pair programming. And these are studies, like this you can look this up on the internet. This is kind of science. A while ago, we got a new coworker. He was placed in my team, and we started working together. And it turned out pair programming was really, really difficult for us because I am someone who likes to type. I think by typing, I evolve. My code grows, and I have to prune it all the time. And then that's how I make software. I think you could describe that as inside out. I just start somewhere, and my coworker, he likes to sit back and soak everything up, and 2 or 3 Pomodoros later, he starts thinking about code. So when we did pair programming, and it was his time to be the driver, the one who was behind the keyboard, he would sit there and go, and I would sit there and go. And of course, me being very comfortable next to him made him feel even more comfortable, so he would just shut down. But that was an opportunity for us to think about how are we going to approach this? Because my style will often lead me to missing important details. I'm very good at creating the first 80% and then I forget things. While as my coworker, he's a slow starter, but he's so good at catching every intricacy. So what we do now, I do the first 2 or 3 Pomodoros. I'll just type and he'll just sit there and sometimes he'll say something. But once those 2 or 3 Pomodoros are passed, he'll start taking over. That's when we start switching, because we usually switch every Pomodoro. And then he'll start fixing my mistakes and improving my names and all kinds of things that make sure that my code starts communicating to other people as well. And things start getting better. And the great thing about pair programming is you don't just review the result, but you review the process. You review how this code came to be. You review which ideas are communicated in that code. And you do that not just what you think is a good idea, but what at least 2 people think is a good idea. And especially if you have 2 people with such wildly diverging styles, you can make sure that at least a lot of different kinds of people might get this. One thing that I think is very important is that if you are navigating, if you're the one who's not typing, make sure that you're not speaking too much. Make sure you are, make sure you pick your moment. You can, if every time you say something, you are slowing the driver down, you are removing him from his flow. But the driver should be talking. He should talk about what he's thinking. He should talk about where he's going, because the navigator who doesn't have to type, who's not slowed down by his fingers, he will think faster than the driver. So, let your navigator know where you're going.
You still code review the code from pair programming, or is that viewed by 2 people already?
Sometimes. We don't code review everything. I'm just standing here to tell you what you should do, not what we do.
What should we do in this case?
We also accept that pair programming can be very tiring. I'm insanely introvert. There's this introverted test that you can do that has 20 questions. I scored 19.5, so I can't do 40 hours of pair programming.
Me neither.
Yeah. So take your moments. And when you feel like pair programming, and the other guy's feeling like pair programming, or girl, go for it. And when you don't, then don't. We do like to start out pair programming, start out the first parts of the sprint, even if we're not feeling too well like it, because that's where some major changes, choices might get made. And at least some part of every day usually. But that doesn't happen every sprint either. I don't know, what you prefer?
Well, pair programming, everything doesn't work for me because, well, it's tiring.
Yeah.
It's absolutely exhausting.
Yeah. And you can't shut the world out. You can't use headphones.
Exactly. So, well, that's not really my style, but, well, starting out is a good thing. And I think it's important to have the code reviewed anyway by an external person because, well, you can easily dive into the same rabbit hole together while pair programming.
Yeah.
So it offers opportunities but risks as well.
That's one benefit of Pomodoroing that I didn't mention because I didn't want to start the discussion of flow. I personally don't like flow. I think it's a really bad idea because you do dive into rabbit holes. So I like to have breaks often. I want my ideas to be challenged. But well, we could, if anyone feels like defending flow, come see me with a beer. I think it's a great addition though. We don't review everything because time. It's not good. I don't know.
It's an iterative process, so
Yeah.
you'll get there.
Speaking of which, who here does not regularly work with all of his coworkers? Who here does not regularly work with all of his coworkers?
What's a coworker? Yeah.
Well, let's okay.
1,000 people in the company.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good. So, is there something like a guild or a bigger team or a department or something that you belong to that has somewhere between 10 and 30 people or something. Because you can't do lightning talks with a team of 2,000 people, but we have 20 development members, and I don't program with most of them at all, because we have set Scrum teams, and we do change that up every now and then. But most of the time, I don't work with my programming coworkers. So I don't know what they know that I don't know that they know that I don't know. So one thing that we like to do is we do lightning talks. We do lightning talks every Thursday at 11:30 until lunch, and that's just dev. But we also have lightning talks. Well, this is a photo of today. So we have an agile guild that do lightning talks. We are backend. We also have a web design team and a front end team, and the service deck does lightning talks, and marketing will start doing lightning talks soon. So we have plenty of time for reviews. We just use it differently. So lightning talks are a great way to share some knowledge. We have a slide, a sheet, I should say, that is actually shown here. So during the week, if you have a good idea, just write it on a Post-it and put it on. It's just a couple of minutes, and you shouldn't take too much time to prepare it anyway. So everyone can see what is going to be shown. And they're open doors, so you can walk in whenever you like. You just can't say anything if it's not your guild.
Aren't there always the same people who do the lightning talk?
Well, there are two people who do lightning talks quite regularly. Freek and I are a little bit easier on our, hey, this is interesting threshold. I mean, I found a coin today. Hey, this is no. Yeah. You know, I follow some different people on Twitter. So if I see someone has retweeted something interesting, I'll just give that a go. Or if I found someone using empty and I think Eriki exists is a really good idea, I'll just give that as a lightning talk. So we make sure the threshold is low, but not everyone's like that.
Well, if I may add, I've noticed that the longer we kept up doing the lightning talk thing, the easier other people would jump in. And I think it started out as maybe even a sort of two-man show, but it's definitely everybody takes his turn. And some people will do 3 a month, and some people will do it once every 2 months. But
yeah, and if you think a coworker has something interesting to say, just give a lightning talk saying the opposite. So finally, retrospectives. I've got five good suggestions to make retrospectives work for you. First off, don't report. Retrospectives are not about reporting to someone or something like that. Secondly, don't report. Retrospectives, they're not about reporting to someone. And third, fourth, and fifth are also don't report. Don't report. Retrospectives are not about reporting to someone. Retrospectives are for your team, as a team, to look back, maybe learn a couple of things, and have a little bit of fun with the result of your past week. If retrospectives become a meeting, then just stop doing them. We like to also talk about experiments during a retrospective. If something maybe came up during the sprint that we think we can solve in some way, then usually during the retrospective we'll think of a few things.
Do you also do tiny experiments?
Yeah. Tiny. Sometimes some bigger, but
we stay within Matthias Faras's guidelines.
Do you have a fixed format for your retrospective?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Kind of. We have a couple of fixed formats. We switch every now and then, and we've also experimented with different formats, but we're pretty happy with the format that we usually use. And because our customers are also there, not every customer is happy with changing the format up because everything, it's already so many meetings and so many different things for them to understand and focus on and connect with. Customers do planning poker with us. That's such a huge step for most of them. We're experimenting with it. We recently made some changes and we're going to make more changes.
Do you take customers or do you mean only
Huh?
are there multiple customers?
Sometimes.
Product owner,
No, there's only one product owner. We always say at the start of the sprint, even if there's 3 or 4 or 5 people with us, we only listen to a you. We ignore the others.
But those aren't poker planning, right? Only the product owner.
We usually let them plan. It's fine.
Everyone.
You.
And also everyone is with the sprint plan.
Usually the sprint planning not so much, but definitely at the backlog sessions. Yeah.
Or you have different, your backlog session and your sprint planning isn't at the same time.
We'll drink a beer. So to wrap it up, what have we learned really? I think I really tried hard to come up with some message or something, and really the only thing I could think of was just kind of be a good guy, be virtuous, have empathy for the people you're working with and for, and for yourself. Be aware of what's happening, observe, listen, be patient, and everything will follow. But just, continuously improve. Observatio, imitatio, and emulatio. 2,000 years from now, when people look back at our software development practice today, they're going to think we're savages anyway. Well, maybe that's not entirely true, but if we can make stuff with our practices that might stand 2,000 years, even if they start to crumble a bit, we might as well be the best savages that we can be. Thank you very much. Any questions?
How would you deal with situations where you don't have a sales team per se? So earlier you said, well, if the requirements are not that clear, we should back to the sales team. So what if you are your own customer? So you are your own product, or you are your own whatever SaaS solution, PaaS solution, something solution with ASMS. What would you do then? Because basically there's no one you can ship them off to.
So we don't ship the requirements back to sales. We are in charge of our requirements, but when the conversation bogs down, that's when we ship the product owner back to sales. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I understand you correctly. So the requirements are unclear and there's no one who can make a sound call on what to do.
Yeah, basically.
Well, I don't know. I would say that it's really difficult to do this by committee. That's why usually we just have one product owner who says yes or no. Even if he or she doesn't know everything, at least we need one person who has the mandate.
Yeah, there's the problem. To get a mandate from the whole company.
Yeah. So I would go back to my slide about patience and humility. So you know that there's a situation that's not optimal. That's fine. You know that there are certain paths to improvement, because at least there is a definition kind of what you could start with the Scrum, and you're not doing that. So there is something you could move towards. Now it's just a matter of getting people to want to go there, because you want to go there, and for some reason you're not going there as a team. Is that correct?
Well, not entirely. More like in your talk you mentioned, well, we have a clock and someone has an hour and you have to extract requirements from that hour. And after that hour, we'll basically say, okay, we have no idea what we're going to do. So
Yes.
let's go back to the drawing board. We're going to send you to sales and they're going to try and explain to you what you actually want. And then you can come back and then you can have a new talk, hopefully,
I trust myself better to extract actual requirements than I trust our sales department. It's a difficult situation. You're not asking a question for no reason, of course. Yeah, I would say that if it's really difficult, because it's difficult to get any requirements going, or is it difficult to prioritize or whatever?
It's difficult
Both.
to get, but yeah, it's basically both.
So maybe just what you're trying to solve is not clear enough. I didn't go into this, but there are means to define long-term strategies that this should all fit in. You have a business vision that your product vision should adhere to, that your epics should adhere to, that your user stories should adhere to, that you can do all kinds of cool things with story mapping and are your user stories not fitting your product vision? Is your product vision not fitting your business vision?
It would be great if we had a vision.
Well, but there's kind of the problem maybe.
Yes, but that's not something I have influence on.
Because that's far away and beyond your team.
Well, yes, but also it's like this fictional dot on the horizon where you work towards.
Yeah.
Although it's not clearly defined what it actually is.
So is your team in charge of like a longer term thing, or do you get requirements externally?
Mostly the latter.
So are those requirements following some kind of goal, or do they just change every week? One week it's all this, next week it's all that.
Yes.
Can you switch jobs? I just say no to those product owners.
Yeah, but that's also not.
Well, that's not agile.
It's
Actually, it is. It's being professional.
if
saying,
you're
we don't
yeah.
know what you want, we don't make it.
If you kind of this is maybe a bit charging, but you could look at bad development practices, and especially when those are happening in spite of better knowledge, you could look at that as some kind of a little bit of an addiction. Don't enable the addiction. If things really are not looking well, not looking to improve, because things being not well is fine. It's about improvement. If there's room for improvement, you're good. You're going to get there.
There is room for improvement. The improvement is let's fire the entire previous team and get in a new team, which we had. And so they start out with, okay, let's start with a vision. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But we have to work or start a sprint now, not like in some arbitrary future scenario.
Well, I would recommend to think of it just in terms of money. That's always easy. You're going to be doing a lot of sprints. Say you're going to work there for another 5 years. You're going to be doing 4 overhalen, nooit live maths doen. You're going to be doing about 250 sprints. So if you have to take 50 of those to make the other 200 super worth it, that's kind of worth it. And this is very broadly speaking, of course. But if the idea that you have to solve something now is the vierkante wielen, especially when you're a bigger organization and you have some time to do poor sprints, just do something different than a sprint. Get your shit fixed. I shouldn't say that.
I think that's good advice.
I think it's a really good question and a really, really interesting challenge. I hope it's also an interesting challenge for you and not just something that's making you feel really bad.
No, I think it's interesting to me that you're focused mostly on the teams. But we're in a kind of weird situation where the teams are up to par, everything is running smoothly.
Yeah.
It's just that the pipeline feeding the teams is the bottleneck at the moment. So it's a different. I don't want to take everyone's time here with my.
Well, I've got another one-liner that's really good, I think. You can't change anything but your team. I mean, you can
that's
give.
The part I have influence on.
Yeah.
This is just
Especially in a big organization. Like Freek and I, we work in an organization with like 35, 40 people. We have a lot of influence. We can kidnap. Sorry, did I say that? We can try to subvert others. Have small meetings every now and then, and see test the water, see if someone's up to co-conspiring with us. So that's just really easier for us. So I empathize. Any other questions?